This morning, the Princess of Wales back on the global stage. Kate's first international trip since her cancer recovery, stepping out on her own, a research trip of sorts, learning about a cause she cares deeply about.
Thousands of people have packed the square. People are hanging out the windows, and you can see her right here, meeting some of her littlest fans.
Catherine entered her son's private room, expecting nothing more troubling than an unfinished schoolbook and a lamp left burning after midnight. Instead, one small metallic reflection stopped her at the doorway. Hidden inside an object George had trusted for months was a device designed to listen. In that instant, the princess was no longer simply a mother checking on her child. She was standing inside a breach that could reach the future of the crown itself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine had noticed the light shortly before midnight. George had fallen asleep at his desk while preparing notes for a school presentation, his papers scattered beneath the lamp. She gathered them carefully, then reached to move it away from the edge. George's private quarters were among the most protected rooms in the residence, entered only by approved relatives, selected staff, and security officers whose movements were recorded. The click changed everything. Catherine lifted the lamp and heard something shift inside its base. She peeled back the felt covering beneath it and found a miniature audio recording transmitter, a tiny machine designed to capture voices whenever sound activated it. A pin-sized light blinked once. Her hand went still. Catherine did not call for help. She placed the lamp down, pulled a blanket over George, and quietly locked the bedroom door from inside. Her first fear was not for the monarchy. It was for her son. Someone may have listened to him laugh, worry, ask questions, or confide in his parents while believing he was safe. William arrived after receiving her coded message. The prince looked at the device but refused to touch it. He stared at George, tightened his jaw, and whispered that nobody outside the room could know, until they understood who had placed it there. Catherine heard control in his voice, but also fury. The transmitter was no ordinary recorder. It carried no manufacturer's mark, and its internal parts suggested security-grade technology, beyond a casual intruder. Then Catherine noticed an adhesive strip beneath the casing. A partial inventory number remained visible, matching the format used on authorized palace communications equipment, meaning the threat may have come from inside the royal system. William reached for the secure telephone, but Catherine stopped him. She reminded him that the lamp had not always belonged to George. It had entered the room after a private family ceremony 3 months earlier. The device explained how someone had listened, but the history of the lamp would reveal exactly which members of the family now had reason to fear what had been heard. A security breach inside a palace is dangerous. A security breach beside a sleeping child is unforgivable. For Catherine, the difference mattered more than any constitutional consequence. For William, it awakened every fear he had tried to conceal about raising an heir under relentless scrutiny. And for George, still unaware of what had been found inches from his bed, the crisis threatened to destroy the one place where he had been allowed to feel like an ordinary boy. George stood at the center of a future he had never chosen. Though still young, he already understood that one day the crown would shape nearly every part of his life. The crown meant the duties, expectations, and public role attached to the monarchy, and those pressures had begun reaching him long before adulthood. His room had become one of the few places where he could speak freely about school, family pressure, and the fear of disappointing people he had never met. Catherine and William had protected those conversations with unusual care. They wanted their son to ask difficult questions away from advisors, cameras, and prepared answers. George needed somewhere he could admit that public duty frightened him, somewhere he did not have to perform. That was why the hidden device felt so cruel. It had invaded the one space built around trust. George stirred and opened his eyes. He found both parents standing near his desk and asked why they were still there. Catherine sat beside him, took his hand, and quietly explained that the lamp had developed an electrical fault. William turned away before answering, afraid that his son would see the anger tightening his face. Catherine hated the lie the moment she spoke it. George deserved honesty, yet telling him the truth could make him fear every servant, every object, and every closed door around him. She wanted to protect his innocence, but she also knew that silence could become another wound. William carried a different kind of guilt. He had approved the recent reorganization of household access, trusting senior officials who promised that George's rooms were secure. Household access meant the controlled system deciding who could enter private royal spaces. Now the prince believed he had failed not as an heir, but as a father. Catherine remembered what George had said beside that lamp only days earlier. He had confessed that he did not want to attend a major ceremony because he felt watched and feared one mistake would embarrass the family. Those words may now have been recorded. William asked whether anything else had been discussed. After a long pause, Catherine admitted they had spoken about where George might live and study as he grew older, plans not yet shared with Charles or senior advisors. Then she remembered the question that changed everything. George had asked whether becoming king meant choosing duty over family. William's answer had been deeply personal. He had spoken about his own childhood and promised that his children would never be forced into silence the way he had been. In that moment, the couple understood the real target. Someone had not only wanted royal information, someone had wanted William's fears, Catherine's influence, and George's doubts about his future. To understand why those private words had become valuable, William and Catherine had to return to the ceremony where the lamp first entered their son's room, and to the moment one quiet disagreement became a hidden act of retaliation. 3 months before Catherine opened the base of the lamp, the royal family had gathered for what appeared to be a harmless private ceremony. There were no crowds, no grand procession, and no hint of danger. Yet behind the polite exchanges, a disagreement was unfolding over George's future. One decision was challenged, one official was humiliated, and one gift was carried through a protected doorway without receiving the inspection that should have exposed everything. William had approved the gathering to mark the completion of his son's renovated study area. Charles, Camilla, Anne, Catherine, senior aides, and members of the royal household responsible for historic furnishings attended. The royal household was the group of officials and staff who managed the family's duties, residences, and private arrangements. For George, the new room was supposed to offer comfort. Instead, it became the place where someone began watching him. Catherine remembered the lamp being presented as a restored piece from royal storage. Staff said it had once stood in a schoolroom used by earlier generations, giving it the appearance of a symbolic gift for a future monarch. George liked it immediately. William saw nothing threatening in it, and the princess had no reason to question its arrival. Adrian Vale changed the mood. As deputy household controller, an official responsible for coordinating palace access and internal operations, he proposed installing a permanent communications terminal inside George's room. William refused. He said his son's private quarters were not an office of state. Vale argued that the terminal was essential for continuity preparation, meaning the process of training and organizing the monarchy for future succession. Catherine supported her husband without hesitation. Her decision ended the discussion in front of Charles and the assembled staff. Vale closed his folder, set his pen down with force, and warned that the prince would one day understand the cost of keeping the institution outside the room. Anne heard the bitterness in his voice. She also watched him leave before the ceremony had formally ended. Charles felt the tension immediately. The king believed George needed gradual preparation for kingship, but he also understood William's fury at seeing a child treated like an institutional asset. He said nothing, and that silence allowed resentment to harden. Catherine later told William that Vale had not looked embarrassed. He had looked betrayed. The prince dismissed her concern, believing the official's pride had merely been wounded. Now, standing beside the hidden transmitter, that mistake returned with crushing force. Security records deepened the fear. The lamp had passed inspection 2 days before the ceremony, leaving a 48-hour gap inside a restricted preparation room controlled by Vale's department. Anne then recalled seeing him beside it after the argument, claiming he was checking its placement despite receiving no request from the restoration team. A private archive photograph revealed the final detail. The electrical cable had been replaced after inspection, allowing the transmitter to run continuously. William immediately suspended Vale's access, but security reached his office too late. The official had already left the estate carrying a sealed leather case. The search for Adrian Vale had begun, but before anyone could pursue him, William demanded answers from the one man who had repeatedly defended the official's authority, his father, the king. William did not request an audience. He entered his father's private study, closed the door, and placed the dismantled transmitter on the desk between them. Charles looked down at the device without speaking. The future king then asked a question no monarch expects to hear from his own heir. How many warnings had been ignored because palace authority mattered more than the safety of a child? What followed was not a briefing, it was a reckoning. Charles had trusted Adrian Vale for years. The official had risen through the royal household by presenting himself as an expert in modern communications and institutional continuity. The system meant to keep the monarchy functioning smoothly through changes of reign. To the king, Vale seemed disciplined and necessary. To William, he had always seemed far too comfortable crossing the line between public duty and private family life. William pushed the transmitter across the desk and told his father exactly where Catherine had found it, beside George's bed. The monarch reached toward the device, then stopped before touching it. He remained seated while his son stood over the desk, reversing the balance of authority that had defined so many of their earlier arguments. William kept his voice controlled at first. Then he accused Charles of allowing officials to treat George as a future office rather than a child. He said the boy had been listened to while sleeping, and the final word broke something inside him. The prince turned away, struggling to contain the fury he had carried from the bedroom. Charles answered with guilt and resistance. He insisted that he had never authorized surveillance. He had trusted Vale because the official promised to close security weaknesses before they could threaten the family. Yet the king's defense sounded hollow even to himself, because the danger had entered through the very system he believed would protect them. William refused to let the argument remain about one device. He reminded his father of earlier moments when private pain had been absorbed into palace strategy and turned into something useful for the institution. Charles replied that the monarchy could not survive if every heir built walls around himself. The future king answered without hesitation, no institution deserved survival at the cost of a child's trust. Charles finally disclosed what Vale had told him after the ceremony. In a documented security request, the official claimed William's refusal of the communications terminal had created a dangerous gap in succession planning, meaning the preparation of the next heir for future duty. The monarch had approved a review of George's security arrangements, but never a recording device. A confidential note made the betrayal clearer. Vale had described his plan as a behavioral continuity assessment, a vague phrase that disguised private monitoring as routine preparation. William demanded immediate control over every room used by his children. Charles hesitated, then signed a temporary order, transferring authority from the central household to the prince's protection team. Charles stopped his son before he reached the door. Vale's leather case had never left the estate. It had been moved to another royal residence, using an authorization code belonging to a member of the family. The crisis was no longer confined to a rogue official, because someone with royal access had helped move the evidence, and Catherine was about to discover whose name had opened the second door. The most dangerous name in a palace investigation is not always the person who built the device. Sometimes it is the person whose authority allowed it to move unseen. When the authorization record was placed before Catherine, she expected to see Adrian Vale's code. Instead, the document carried the credentials of Queen Camilla's private office. The discovery did not prove that she knew what was inside the case, but it placed her household directly between the missing official and the evidence everyone feared had been collected. Catherine understood why the record mattered. Senior royal offices held limited authorization codes, special credentials allowing sealed materials to move between residences without ordinary inspection. The system depended on trust. When a request appeared to come from a principal royal office, few officials challenged it. That protection had now become the breach. Camilla received the news while reviewing invitations alone. The queen consort removed her glasses, read the transfer record twice, and asked Helena March whether she had personally watched Vale close the leather case. The assistant private secretary, an aide responsible for managing confidential correspondence and official arrangements, admitted that she had not. Camilla placed the paper down and said nothing for several seconds. The silence carried anger and humiliation. Camilla knew her office had been used, but she also understood what William might believe. The case had entered a storage suite controlled by her staff, and the evidence concerned George. One careless approval could now look like deliberate interference in the private life of a child. Catherine met Camilla without aides present. She placed the authorization record between them and asked whether anyone in the office had discussed George's conversations or William's plans. The Queen denied it immediately. Her answer was sharp, almost wounded. But Catherine's expression remained guarded. Trust could not be restored by outrage alone. Power had divided the family into dangerous lines. Charles controlled the central household. William controlled George's immediate protection. Camilla controlled the office through which the case had traveled. Anne, trusted by both sides, became the only senior figure able to examine the records without appearing to protect one faction. Anne found the first fracture. Helena's approval had been entered 12 minutes after Camilla's office officially closed. The aide said Vale had pressured her by telephone, claiming the king had already approved the transfer, yet the call had not come from his registered number. It came from an internal extension near the archival communications room, suggesting he was still inside the estate after security believed he had gone. Camilla made her decision. She ordered every device and access log in her office surrendered, then handed Catherine the master key to the storage suite. The queen told her to open it herself, so no one could claim evidence had been removed. Catherine unlocked the room. The leather case lay open and empty. Beneath it rested a handwritten list containing 7 dates when William, George, and she had spoken privately in the boys' room. The list proved the surveillance had been targeted, repeated, and deliberate. Now the family had to confront what may already have been taken and who was about to use it. Until that moment, the palace had been fighting the possibility of exposure. Then a recording arrived. It contained no state secret, no diplomatic confession, and no constitutional instruction. It was far more damaging. The file captured George asking his father whether people would still love him if he decided he did not want to become king. William's answer followed soft, unguarded, and never intended for anyone beyond the room. With one message, the private fears of a child became leverage against the crown. The recording reached the palace press office through an encrypted account, a protected digital channel designed to hide the sender's identity. One demand appeared beneath the file: restore Adrian Vale's access credentials, and suspend the investigation by noon. The message was brief because it did not need to explain the threat. Everyone understood what would happen if the palace refused. Investigators matched the audio signature to the transmitter hidden inside George's lamp. The recording had been made 6 weeks earlier during a private evening conversation involving the boy, William, and Catherine. That detail mattered because it proved the device had not been planted for one isolated moment. Someone had been listening over time. William entered a secure briefing room and listened to the first 20 seconds. When George's voice asked whether he could refuse the crown, the prince removed the headphones and placed them on the table. He ordered the officers not to play the child's words again unless absolutely necessary. His voice remained steady, but his hands did not. Catherine reacted with raw fear. She returned to George's room, removed every electrical object she could find, and sat on the floor while staff searched the walls, furniture, and vents. The princess no longer trusted the room that had once protected her son. Every harmless object now carried suspicion. William wanted the demand rejected without reply. He argued that surrender would invite more blackmail. Charles feared that refusal could trigger a release capable of damaging confidence in the succession, the process deciding who would inherit the throne. The king spoke of constitutional consequences. The future king spoke of principle. Catherine stopped them both. She demanded to know why they were discussing the monarchy before discussing what exposure would do to George. Her anger cut through the room. The victim was not an institution. The victim was a child whose private fear had been stolen and turned into pressure. The residents entered a controlled lockdown. Staff passes were frozen, outside communication was restricted, and everyone linked to the study ceremony was ordered to remain available for questioning. Investigators traced the encrypted message to a relay activated from a vehicle registered to Vale's sister. The car had entered a remote royal property that morning and had never been seen leaving. Anne uncovered the final pattern. The 7 dates on the handwritten list followed major royal decisions, proving Vale had been monitoring how William explained palace conflict to George. But as security prepared to search the property, the boy overheard 2 officers discussing the recording. The investigation was finally closing in on the man behind the device, but inside the family, the most painful confrontation was about to come from George himself. George did not shout when he confronted his parents. That made the moment harder. He stood at the end of the corridor holding the empty lamp base and asked why everyone had lied to him. There were no advisors present, no security officers, and no carefully prepared explanation. Only Catherine, William, and their son facing the cost of protection without honesty. The future of their trust would be decided in a conversation no microphone would ever be allowed to steal again. George had found the dismantled casing inside a room where security officers had stored objects removed from his bedroom. Then he heard one of them mention a recording. In that instant, the explanation about an electrical fault collapsed. The boy understood that the adults around him had hidden something far more frightening. Catherine asked every aide to leave the family sitting room. William closed the door himself and placed his secure telephone outside. The device was a protected phone used for confidential royal communication, but this conversation would not belong to the palace. It would belong only to them. George placed the lamp base on the table and asked whether someone had listened to him say he did not want to be king. Catherine moved toward him, but her son stepped back. That small movement wounded her more than anger could have. He was not only frightened by the surveillance, he was hurt by the people who had claimed to protect him. Catherine admitted that she had chosen silence because she wanted to spare him from fear. George answered that not knowing had made him feel foolish rather than safe. His words forced the princess to face a painful truth. Protection, when it denied someone a voice, could become another form of control. William spoke carefully. He told George that the stolen recording captured a question, not a decision, and that uncertainty did not make him weak. Then the prince confessed that he had felt the same fear as a boy but had rarely been allowed to express it. George listened because his father was no longer speaking as an heir. He was speaking as a son. George asked whether he would be forced to become king regardless of what he wanted. William explained that duty would always shape their lives, but no title would matter more than his ability to speak honestly within his own family. The crown could guide his future. It could not erase his humanity. George then made his own demand. He wanted to help identify the recording dates and be included in every decision concerning his privacy. Catherine agreed and promised that nothing about the investigation would be hidden from him again. George also remembered something important. The lamp often made a faint click when the door opened after a long silence. He recalled Adrian Vale entering once to adjust the wiring, placing the official directly beside the device after installation. That night, George chose to return to his room. William stayed beside him until he slept, while Catherine placed an ordinary battery-powered lamp on the table, chosen by her son himself. At dawn, Anne telephoned. Vale had been found at the remote property, surrounded by copied recordings and preparing a final release to the press. The family had repaired the truth between themselves. Now they had to prevent the stolen words from being turned into a public weapon. By sunrise, the palace could no longer contain the story. A fragment of George's stolen conversation had reached a broadcaster, and the words of a frightened child were suddenly being analyzed as though they were a declaration of state. Yet the reaction Adrian Vale expected never arrived. Instead of turning against the young prince, the public recognized something painfully human. A boy questioning a future chosen before he was old enough to understand it. Vale had been detained before sending his entire archive, but one edited recording had already reached several media organizations. Most agreed not to broadcast a minor's private words, though a short transcript appeared online. The palace then faced a danger it could not control. Once the words escaped, they no longer belonged only to the family. Charles authorized a public statement confirming that an unauthorized listening device had been found in George's room and that a former household official was under investigation. A public statement was an official palace message issued to explain a major event. The king refused to repeat the child's words and condemned the violation of his privacy. The next morning changed the mood. A major newspaper appeared with an empty bedroom lamp beneath the headline, "They listened to a child." The front page shifted attention away from succession politics and toward the cruelty of the intrusion. The question was no longer whether George doubted his future. It was why anyone believed they had the right to steal that doubt. A broadcaster outside Windsor Castle made the feeling even clearer. The presenter refused to repeat George's private question and told viewers that constitutional importance did not erase a child's right to fear, uncertainty, or privacy. That decision gave the public permission to see him as a boy before seeing him as an heir. A quiet crowd gathered near the gates. People left handwritten cards addressed to George, and one message rose above the rest. Being afraid does not make you less brave. Catherine later asked for it to be brought inside. George saw the newspaper across the breakfast table and looked terrified. Catherine turned it face down, but William showed him selected messages of support. The prince wanted his son to understand that the public had not rejected him. They had recognized him. Camilla then accepted responsibility in a recorded palace statement for the failure inside her office's authorization process. The queen denied knowing about the case, but she refused to hide behind staff. Her decision weakened suspicion and restored some trust. Investigators confirmed Vale's motive through seized notes and recorded files. He believed William's approach to raising George threatened the traditional system surrounding the heir. He wanted to prove that the boy was being encouraged to question duty rather than submit to it. Charles responded by abolishing the continuity preparation program and transferring control of the Wales children's private arrangements to their parents, protected by independent oversight. The last verdict would not be delivered by investigators or headlines. It would be delivered inside the family, through the changes they were finally willing to make. The hidden device was small enough to fit inside a lamp, but the crisis it created exposed something enormous. For generations, royal children had been taught that privacy could be sacrificed to preparation, and that fear should be hidden beneath duty. This time, the family refused that bargain. Catherine's discovery did more than uncover a listening device. It forced a king, an heir, and a young prince to decide whether the crown existed to control the people born beneath it or to protect them. Adrian Vale was permanently removed from royal service and surrendered every known copy of the recordings. Investigators confirmed through seized files and recorded interviews that no foreign government, media organization, or political group had directed him. His actions grew from obsession with institutional control and resentment toward William's refusal to surrender George's private life. Helena March was cleared of knowingly supporting the surveillance, but she resigned after accepting responsibility for approving the uninspected transfer. Camilla then restructured her office, so no aide could authorize sealed movements without independent confirmation. The Queen understood that trust without safeguards had nearly destroyed the family's confidence in one another. Charles gathered William, Catherine, George, Camilla, and Anne inside the same study where the confrontation had erupted. The dismantled transmitter remained sealed inside an evidence container, a protected box used to preserve material during an official investigation. The king looked directly at his grandson and apologized for allowing palace systems to enter a space that should have belonged only to him. Charles admitted that fear of institutional weakness had made him trust procedure over family instinct. The monarch offered no excuse. By accepting responsibility without qualification, he finally gave William the acknowledgement his son had demanded. William promised that George would be prepared for duty through honesty, not pressure or secret monitoring. Catherine added that privacy would never again be treated as a privilege granted by the palace. It would be recognized as a right belonging to every child in the family. George did not answer with ceremony. He simply asked whether the old lamp was gone forever. Catherine said yes. Her son nodded and chose a new one himself, reclaiming control through one ordinary decision. Charles then signed a permanent family protection charter, a binding palace rule preventing royal departments from monitoring minor family members without parental consent and independent legal approval. That evening, George returned to the school notes interrupted on the night of the discovery. William read beside him while Catherine paused at the doorway. No officers searched the furniture. No coded calls disturbed the silence. The crisis did not weaken George's place in the monarchy, it redefined it. His uncertainty was no longer treated as a threat, and his humanity was no longer seen as an obstacle to duty. The palace survived because it chose the child before the crown, and that decision became its strongest act of preservation. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.